I learned what really happened at my fiancée's bachelorette party, so I disappeared before the wedding. The email arrived on a Sunday afternoon while I was comparing honeymoon excursion packages, trying to decide between the snorkeling tour and the zip-lining adventure that Christina had circled in the resort brochure. 6 years with Christina had taught me she was meticulous about details, the kind of person who color-coded our shared calendar and kept spreadsheets for wedding RSVPs, which made the encrypted email from an anonymous sender feel like something from a different universe entirely. I'd been together with Christina since we were both 26, meeting at a mutual friend's birthday party where she'd impressed me by knowing more about craft beer than anyone in the room, and we'd built what I thought was a solid foundation, steady jobs, a shared apartment downtown, the kind of comfortable rhythm that made planning a future feel natural rather than forced. She was in Las Vegas for her bachelorette weekend with 9 friends, a 4-day trip that had required months of coordination and a group chat that pinged notifications at all hours, while I stayed home in our apartment handling the final wedding logistics and enjoying the quiet. The wedding was exactly 2 weeks away, invitations sent to 160 guests, deposits paid on everything from the venue to the photographer to the vintage car rental, and I'd spent Saturday afternoon confirming our honeymoon flights while Christina sent occasional group photos from poolside, 10 women in matching pink shirts, cocktails raised, smiles that looked genuine enough through a phone screen. When the email appeared in my inbox at 3:47 p.m. with the subject line, "You need to see this before you marry her," my first instinct was to delete it as spam or some cruel prank, but something made me click, maybe the specificity of the timeline or the formal tone that didn't match typical scam language. The message contained no text, just a video file labeled with yesterday's date and a duration stamp of 4 minutes and 18 seconds, and when I downloaded it to my laptop and hit play, I watched my entire future disintegrate in real-time high-definition footage. The video showed Christina in what appeared to be a penthouse suite, one of those Vegas hotel rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Strip, and she wasn't alone. 3 men I'd never seen before, all of them clearly comfortable with each other, laughing and touching in ways that made my stomach clench. I watched her lean into one of them, a tall guy in an expensive-looking button-down, while another stood behind her with his hands on her waist, and the casual intimacy of it felt worse somehow than if it had looked forced or uncomfortable. The camera angle suggested someone was filming from across the room, probably sitting on a couch or chair, steady enough to be deliberate rather than accidental, and whoever held the phone had captured everything with brutal clarity, the way Christina tilted her head back laughing at something one of them said, the way she didn't pull away when they got closer, the way she looked directly at the camera at one point with an expression I'd never seen before and said words that punched through my chest like physical blows. "My fiancé will never know. This is our secret forever." Her voice was clear, unmistakable, slightly slurred but coherent enough that there was no question about what she was saying or what she meant. I played it 3 more times, each viewing hoping I'd misunderstood or that it was somehow edited or taken out of context. But the timestamp matched yesterday's date, the room matched the luxury hotel her group had booked, and that was definitely Christina wearing the diamond engagement ring I'd saved 8 months to afford. My hands were shaking when I finally closed the laptop, and I sat there in our living room surrounded by wedding planning binders and paint samples for the house we talked about buying, trying to process what I'd just witnessed while my phone buzzed with a new text from her, "Having the best time. Miss you. Can't wait to be your wife." I wanted to call her immediately, to scream or demand explanations or at least hear her voice try to make sense of this, but something stopped me. Maybe self-preservation, maybe the analytical part of my brain that worked in data systems and knew that knee-jerk reactions rarely produced useful outcomes. Instead, I called my older brother Derek, who lived 2 hours north and worked as a private investigator specializing in corporate fraud, because if anyone could help me think clearly through this nightmare, it was him. He answered on the second ring, immediately sensing something wrong in my voice, and I sent him the video file without explanation, listening to his sharp intake of breath 15 seconds into playback. "How long have you had this?" he asked, his tone shifting into professional mode. 30 minutes, maybe 40, I said, staring at the ceiling and trying to remember how to breathe normally. Derek spent the next hour walking me through practical steps. Don't contact Christina yet, don't tell anyone else. Don't make any decisions while in shock, and asked me to forward the original email so he could analyze the metadata and trace the sender if possible. By 7 p.m., he'd called back with preliminary findings that made everything exponentially worse. The video was filmed 5 days ago, he said, his voice careful and measured. Not last night like the timestamp suggested, someone renamed the file, but the original metadata shows it was recorded on Tuesday evening, which means this wasn't some final night mistake. I processed that information slowly, realizing it meant Christina had been lying to me throughout the entire trip, sending sweet text messages and photos of innocent group activities while apparently spending her nights in penthouse suites with men she'd never mentioned. Derek continued, explaining he'd contacted a friend who worked hotel security in Vegas and learned that Christina's group had been partying at a high-roller suite rented by 3 investment bankers from New York, not just on Tuesday but throughout the entire 4-day trip, with doormen confirming the same women returned multiple nights. The guys' names are Aaron Westbrook, Justin Chin, and Michael Brennan, Derek said, reading from notes. All early 30s, finance sector, frequent Vegas visitors who apparently make a habit of connecting with bachelorette parties through social media and club promoters. That detail hit differently. This wasn't random, wasn't accidental, wasn't Christina making a drunken mistake on her final night of freedom, but something calculated and sustained across multiple days, something that had been happening while I'd been home alone comparing snorkeling tours and imagining our future. I thanked Derek, promised I wouldn't do anything rash, and spent the rest of Sunday night sitting in the dark apartment trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the person I'd seen on that video, the person who'd looked directly at the camera and promised her fiancé would never find out, the person who'd apparently been living a completely different life than the one she'd been texting me about for 4 days straight. Christina returned Monday evening with luggage full of Vegas souvenirs and a sunburn across her shoulders, kissing me at the door like nothing had changed while I stood there holding groceries and pretending my entire world hadn't collapsed 2 days earlier. I'd spent 48 hours rehearsing this moment, practicing the right facial expressions in the bathroom mirror, and when she hugged me I forced myself to return it with appropriate enthusiasm while my mind cataloged every detail of her behavior for inconsistencies. She talked non-stop about poolside brunches and shows they'd seen, carefully curated stories that never mentioned penthouse suites or investment bankers, and I nodded along while watching her face for tells. Did she pause before certain details? Did her eyes shift when describing Tuesday night? Did she touch her engagement ring with guilt or just habit? "I missed you so much," she said, unpacking a tacky slot machine keychain she'd bought me at the airport gift shop, and I told her I'd missed her too because what else could I say without revealing my hand? That night while she showered, I photographed every screen of her phone using my own camera, working quickly through texts and social media, my hands steady despite the adrenaline making my heart hammer against my ribs. What I found was somehow worse than the video. Dozens of deleted messages that I recovered using a backup app Derek had recommended, showing pre-planned arrangements to meet these specific men at their suite every single night of the trip. The earliest messages dated back 2 months, flirtatious exchanges with someone named Aaron from Instagram, Christina writing things like, "Counting down the days," and "My friends are so excited to party with you guys," and worst of all, "My fiancé thinks I'm just doing typical bachelorette stuff." I screenshotted everything, sent copies to Derek's encrypted email, and climbed into bed beside Christina feeling like I was sleeping next to a complete stranger who just happened to look like the woman I'd planned to marry. Tuesday morning I woke before her alarm, made coffee like always, and watched her get ready for her final dress alterations while commenting on wedding details as if I gave a damn about centerpiece options or whether the DJ should play more Motown. She left at 9:15 a.m., kissing me goodbye and saying she'd be back by 3, and the moment her car pulled away I executed the exit plan Derek and I had spent Monday night perfecting. First stop was our bank where I withdrew my half of our joint savings account, $14,300 that represented 2 years of careful budgeting and my entire safety net, leaving her half untouched because I wanted no accusations of theft. I changed passwords on every shared account, canceled my credit cards that had her name attached, and transferred my direct deposit to a new account at a different bank entirely, each action feeling simultaneously surreal and liberating. Back at the apartment, I packed 2 suitcases with clothes and essentials, my laptop, important documents, and the wooden box my grandfather had left me, working systematically through each room and taking only what was definitively mine. I left her engagement ring on the kitchen counter, the princess cut solitaire that had cost me 8 months of careful saving, along with a printed screenshot from the video showing her face clearly, and a note I'd rewritten 6 times before settling on brutal simplicity. I know everything about Vegas. The wedding is cancelled. No explanations, no accusations, no opening for negotiation, just a statement of fact that would tell her exactly how much I knew and how final my decision was. I loaded my car by noon, took one last look at the apartment we'd shared for 3 years, and drove north toward Derek's cabin in the mountains, for hours away through increasingly remote terrain that matched my desire to disappear completely. Derek met me at the door with beer and zero judgment, showing me to the guest room and giving me space to simply exist without performing or explaining or justifying my choices to anyone. I turned off my phone completely that first day, the silence feeling both terrifying and necessary, and spent 72 hours in isolation while Derek handled logistics I couldn't bear to face. He canceled the wedding venue with appropriate apologies, notified the officiant and photographer, and sent brief identical messages to our guest list. The wedding is canceled due to personal circumstances. Please disregard your invitation. My parents drove up on Wednesday, my mother crying before she even got through the cabin door, and I showed them the video because they deserved to understand why their son had vanished 2 weeks before his wedding. Dad watched it once, closed the laptop, and said, "You did the right thing," while Mom held my hand and asked what I needed, both of them devastated but supportive in ways that reminded me what actual love looked like. Christina's family remained completely unaware of the real reason for the cancellation, because despite everything she'd done, I wasn't interested in public humiliation or revenge, just distance and the space to process what felt like a death of the future I'd been counting on. I reactivated my phone on Friday morning, 3 days before what should have been our wedding day, and watched it explode with notifications like a bomb finally detonating after a delayed fuse, 93 missed calls, 147 text messages, 27 voicemails, and enough social media alerts that my screen froze trying to load them all. The messages from Christina told a complete story of emotional deterioration, starting Monday afternoon with confused texts asking where I was, progressing through Tuesday's angry demands that I explain myself immediately, and culminating in Wednesday's unhinged voicemails where she screamed about abandonment and betrayal with zero apparent irony. "How could you just leave?" she'd sobbed into my voicemail at 2 a.m. Thursday. "We're supposed to get married in 4 days and you disappeared like I'm nothing to you." I listened to all 27 voicemails in sequence, hearing her cycle through confusion, rage, bargaining, and finally a cold fury that felt more genuine than anything she'd said to my face in months. By Thursday evening, her strategy had shifted. She'd hired a lawyer who sent a formal letter to my work email demanding I contact them immediately regarding matrimonial obligations and shared financial assets, and she'd frozen our joint credit cards, though that move came too late since I'd already transferred everything. What made my jaw clench was discovering she'd told everyone, mutual friends, coworkers, random acquaintances on social media, that I'd abandoned her due to cold feet and commitment issues, painting herself as the devastated bride left at the altar by a coward too weak to communicate. Her Instagram post from Thursday had 240 comments of support, people calling me every name imaginable while she played the victim with Oscar-worthy performance, writing about how heartbroken she was that someone could throw away 6 years, without even having the decency to explain why. My own friend group had split almost evenly, half believing Christina's version because it arrived first and came with tears, the other half staying quiet and waiting to hear my side, though several had texted asking if I was okay and where the hell I'd gone. The situation escalated Friday afternoon when Christina's mother showed up at my workplace, somehow getting past lobby security and creating a scene in front of my entire department that required 2 security guards to resolve. My boss called me into his office afterward, his expression somewhere between concerned and annoyed, and I gave him the abbreviated version: Fiancée cheated in Vegas, wedding cancelled, taking a few personal days, which he accepted with a grimace and instructions to handle my personal life away from company property. Derek had been fielding calls from Christina's lawyer all week, politely explaining I had no legal obligation to communicate with anyone and that all wedding contracts had been properly cancelled with appropriate notice, though apparently her father was threatening legal action for $43,000 in non-refundable expenses. "Let him threaten," Derek said when he called with updates. "You've got documentation of infidelity, which is grounds for cancellation in anyone's book." Saturday morning brought the confrontation I'd been dreading, when Christina somehow tracked down Derek's cabin address, probably through my parents, who hadn't realized they shouldn't share that information, and showed up with 2 friends for backup. I was sitting on the deck reading when I heard car doors slam, looking up to see Christina storming across the gravel driveway wearing designer sunglasses and an expression of pure rage, her friends trailing behind like nervous bodyguards. "You owe me an explanation," she announced, not even bothering with pleasantries. "You humiliated me in front of everyone we know." I pulled out my phone, opened the video file, and hit play without saying a word, watching her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then panic as she realized exactly what I was showing her. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice going shrill. "That's not, someone edited that, it's deepfake technology, you can't possibly—" "Stop," I said quietly, pausing the video on a frame showing her face clearly. "I've had 3 different people verify the metadata. This is real, it's from Tuesday night in Vegas, and we both know it." Her friends had gone silent, clearly not knowing what they'd walked into, and Christina's face crumbled from anger into something closer to desperation. "Okay, fine, it happened," she said, words tumbling out fast. "But it meant absolutely nothing. I was drunk and stupid, and it was just one mistake on my last night of freedom." "It wasn't one night," I interrupted, pulling up the Instagram messages on my screen. "You planned this for 2 months, you met them every single night, and you told the camera I'd never find out." She stared at the messages, her mouth opening and closing, and I watched her recalibrate strategies in real time, switching from denial to justification. "Everyone has bachelor party hookups, it's basically tradition, and you're acting like I committed some crime when guys do this all the time without consequences." "I didn't," I said. "I spent that weekend at home planning our honeymoon while you were telling strangers your fiancé was an idiot who'd never know better." Something shifted in her expression then, the mask dropping completely, and what remained was someone I didn't recognize at all. "You're really going to throw away 6 years over one weekend?" she asked, her tone shifting toward manipulation. "After everything we've built together, after all the plans we made, you're just done?" I stood up, pocketing my phone, and looked at her directly. "You were done the moment you arranged to meet those men 2 months ago. I'm just catching up to reality." She tried several more approaches over the next 20 minutes. Tears, anger, bargaining, threats, but never once actually apologized, never acknowledged the betrayal as wrong, only explained and justified and minimized until her friends finally convinced her to leave. As their car pulled away, Derek stepped out onto the deck carrying 2 beers. "You recorded that whole conversation, right?" he asked, and I nodded, showing him my phone where the voice recorder had been running in my pocket the entire time, capturing her admission that it happened and her revelation that one of the men was someone she'd been casually flirting with for months. That recording would prove useful later, though at the moment I just felt exhausted and hollow, watching the dust settle on the driveway where my former future had just driven away. The Facebook message arrived Sunday evening from someone named Elaine Westbrook, a name I didn't recognize until I read the first sentence and felt my stomach drop all over again. "I'm the wife of Aaron Westbrook, one of the men from Vegas, and I think we need to talk about what our partners did," she'd written, including her phone number and a request that I call when ready. I stared at that message for 20 minutes, debating whether engaging would bring clarity or just more pain, before finally dialing her number and hearing a woman's voice answer on the second ring, tired and bitter in equal measure. Elaine explained that Aaron had confessed everything 3 days ago after she'd found hotel receipts and suspicious charges on their credit card, breaking down and admitting to serial infidelity with bachelorette parties he'd been arranging through Instagram for over a year. He told me about Christina specifically because apparently she was different from the others, more enthusiastic, more willing, already planning to meet up before the trip even started, Elaine said, her voice shaking with controlled anger. "I found their message history going back 2 months, and I thought you deserved to know this wasn't some random hookup." She sent me screenshots that made my hands tremble holding the phone. Christina's Instagram DMs with Aaron starting in early April, Flirtatious messages that escalated quickly into explicit planning, with Christina writing, "Can't wait to have some real fun before I'm locked down forever," in a message dated 3 weeks before Vegas. The casual cruelty of that phrase hit harder than the video somehow, the implication that our entire relationship was a prison she needed to escape, that marriage to me represented captivity rather than commitment. We talked for 90 minutes. Two people bound by betrayal comparing notes like investigators, and Elaine revealed details that filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed. She'd contacted hotel security through a lawyer friend and obtained footage from the penthouse floor showing Christina kissing one of the men goodbye on Monday morning. Not a drunken mistake kiss but something tender and intimate, his hand on her cheek and her leaning into it like they'd known each other for years rather than hours. "That's what got me," Elaine said quietly. "The way she looked at him in that footage. My husband said it was just meaningless fun, but that goodbye didn't look meaningless at all." I thanked her for reaching out, promised to share anything I learned that might help her situation, and spent the rest of Sunday night staring at those screenshots, trying to understand how someone could text, "I love you, can't wait to marry you," while simultaneously planning to cheat with strangers she'd been courting online for weeks. Tuesday brought another revelation, this time from Phoebe, one of Christina's bridesmaids who'd been on the Vegas trip and had apparently been wrestling with guilt since returning home. She contacted me through a mutual friend, asking if we could meet somewhere private, and I agreed to coffee at a place 40 minutes from Derek's cabin where nobody would recognize either of us. Phoebe looked terrible when she arrived, dark circles under her eyes and her hands shaking as she ordered tea she never touched. And before I could even ask questions, she started talking like a confession had been building pressure for weeks. "I'm the one who filmed it and sent you the video," she said, words rushing out. "I know that makes me a horrible friend to Christina, but I couldn't let you marry her without knowing the truth." She explained that she'd been uncomfortable the entire trip, watching Christina and 3 other bridesmaids enthusiastically engage with these men while the rest of the group tried to pretend it wasn't happening. And on Tuesday night she'd secretly recorded the penthouse suite interaction because she felt like she was watching a crime in slow motion. "I sent it anonymously because I'm a coward," Phoebe admitted, finally meeting my eyes. "But you seemed like a genuinely good guy who deserved better than walking into a marriage built on lies." What came next was somehow worse than anything I'd already learned. Phoebe revealed that Vegas wasn't Christina's first infidelity, that 18 months ago she'd had a 6-week affair with a client at her marketing firm, something that Phoebe and 2 other bridesmaids had known about but kept secret at Christina's desperate pleading. "She swore it was a mistake, that she loved you and it would never happen again, and like idiots we believed her," Phoebe said, her voice breaking. "When she started planning the Vegas thing, I knew it was going to happen again, but I didn't know how to warn you without blowing up everything." She pulled out her phone and showed me text messages from the Bachelorette group chat, conversations I was never supposed to see, showing Christina and her inner circle deliberately planning the Vegas encounters like a military operation. Christina had written, "Mark's so focused on wedding planning he won't even notice if I'm distracted," in a message dated a month before the trip, followed by laughing emojis from friends who apparently thought deceiving me was hilarious entertainment. Another message showed Christina referring to our relationship as comfortable but boring, and saying she needed one last adventure before suburban monotony sets in forever, treating our planned marriage like a death sentence she was obligated to serve. I sat there reading through months of conversations that revealed a version of Christina I'd never suspected existed, manipulative, calculating, contemptuous of the life we were building together, viewing me as a reliable provider rather than a partner she actually respected or desired. "I'm so sorry," Phoebe said when I finally looked up from her phone, and I believed her because her guilt seemed genuine in ways Christina's explanations never had. "You deserve someone who actually values what you offer instead of treating you like a safety net." I thanked her for her honesty, for the courage it took to betray a friendship in service of something more important, and drove back to Derek's cabin feeling like I'd finally seen the complete picture of what I'd escaped. Not just a weekend of bad decisions, but a pattern of calculated deception from someone who'd been performing the role of loving fiancé while actively planning her exit strategy from our relationship. 3 weeks after the canceled wedding, Christina's lawyer dropped a bombshell via certified letter that arrived at my new apartment address. She was 10 weeks pregnant and claiming I was the father, demanding I return immediately to discuss our child's future, with thinly veiled threats about child support obligations and parental responsibility. I read that letter 5 times, my brain doing math that didn't add up, because 10 weeks ago placed conception in late April, right around the time we'd had that massive fight about her spending habits and hadn't been intimate for nearly 2 weeks before her Vegas trip. The timeline felt suspicious from every angle, and when I called Derek he confirmed what my gut already knew. This was either a lie or the baby belonged to someone else, most likely one of the investment bankers she'd been planning to meet for months. Demand a paternity test, Derek advised immediately. Don't engage with anything else until you have scientific proof, because this feels like a trap to force you back into her life. I retained my own attorney that afternoon, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd handled Derek's divorce and had zero tolerance for manipulation, and she immediately sent a response demanding prenatal paternity testing before any further discussion about parental obligations or financial support. Christina's lawyer responded within 48 hours, calling the request harassment of a pregnant woman and suggesting I was trying to avoid responsibility for my own child, while Christina herself sent me tearful voicemails about how cruel I was being during her vulnerable time. "I'm carrying your baby and you're treating me like a criminal," she sobbed into my voicemail. "After everything we meant to each other, you can't even show basic decency." The legal wrangling stretched over 8 brutal weeks while I waited for Christina to agree to testing, each side's attorneys sending increasingly hostile letters that racked up billable hours I could barely afford. Her uncle turned out to be a personal injury attorney who sent threatening letters about defamation and emotional distress, claiming I'd slandered Christina by telling people about Vegas and damaged her reputation in ways that warranted financial compensation. Patricia responded with copies of the video, the Instagram messages, and Phoebe's testimony, essentially daring them to pursue litigation that would make everything public record. During this period, I lost 12 pounds without trying, my appetite disappearing along with my ability to sleep more than 4 hours a night, and I started seeing a therapist twice weekly just to function at work where my performance had noticeably declined. My boss was understanding but concerned, and I gave him enough details to explain why I was a mess: canceled wedding, cheating fiancé, disputed paternity claim, which he accepted with sympathy and a suggestion that I consider taking short-term disability leave if needed. Meanwhile, Christina had apparently moved on with remarkable speed, her Instagram showing photos with one of the Vegas men, Elaine's husband who'd obviously left his marriage, at restaurants and parks, her pregnancy visible in the images as she posed with her hand on her stomach and captions about new beginnings and unexpected blessings. The audacity of publicly dating one of the men she'd cheated with while simultaneously demanding I accept paternity responsibility was almost impressive in its shamelessness. Elaine sent me screenshots of these posts with bitter commentary, her own divorce now in progress, both of us watching our former partners build a relationship on the wreckage of what they'd destroyed. "She's telling people you abandoned her when she got pregnant," Elaine informed me during one of our occasional check-in calls. "Playing the single mother card while conveniently leaving out that she was cheating on you when conception occurred." Christina's attorney argued she was moving on with her life, and I should support my child regardless of the relationship status, which would have been reasonable if there was any actual evidence the child was mine beyond her insistence. Patricia pushed hard for the paternity test, finally getting a court order that Christina couldn't refuse without looking guilty, and we scheduled the procedure for early August, nearly 2 months after that initial letter arrived. I showed up at the medical clinic feeling sick with anxiety, not knowing which outcome I wanted. If the baby was mine, I'd be tied to Christina forever through co-parenting. If it wasn't, it confirmed she'd been trying to trap me with another man's child, which somehow felt even more violating. The test itself took 15 minutes, a simple blood draw that would take 2 weeks to process, and I didn't see Christina during the appointment since we'd arranged separate time slots specifically to avoid confrontation. Those 2 weeks waiting for results were among the worst of my life, worse even than the immediate aftermath of discovering the video, because at least then I'd known what I was dealing with. Now I was suspended in uncertainty, unable to move forward or let go, trapped in legal limbo while Christina's attorney kept sending letters about preparing for shared custody and my financial obligations. I drafted and deleted a dozen text messages to Christina asking if she actually believed the baby was mine or if this was calculated manipulation, but never sent any of them because I knew engaging would only make things worse. The results finally arrived via certified mail on a Thursday afternoon, a thick envelope from the testing laboratory that I stared at for 10 minutes before opening, and when I finally read the report my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the pages. 0% probability of paternity, definitively excluded as the biological father, no margin of error or ambiguity whatsoever. I called Patricia immediately after reading the results, barely able to speak through the mixture of relief and rage flooding my system, and she responded with grim satisfaction that we finally had ammunition to end this nightmare permanently. "We're filing a countersuit tomorrow," she said, her voice sharp with professional anger. "Fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and we're going after every penny you spent on legal fees defending yourself against her lies." The countersuit hit Christina's attorney like a tactical strike, demanding $35,000 in damages plus legal costs and including a cease and desist order against her entire family for their harassment campaign. Patricia scheduled a deposition for the following week where Christina would have to answer questions under oath about the pregnancy, the paternity claim, and her knowledge of who the actual father might be. I attended that deposition sitting beside Patricia in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and anxiety, watching Christina walk in with her lawyer looking significantly less confident than she had 2 months earlier. Her pregnancy was visible now, probably 5 months along, and she wouldn't meet my eyes as we went through preliminary questions about our relationship timeline and the Vegas trip. When Patricia asked directly about the paternity test results, Christina's lawyer tried to object, claiming the question was inflammatory, but the mediator overruled and Christina had to answer. "The results show Mark isn't the father," she admitted quietly, staring at the table. "When did you first suspect the child might not be mine?" Patricia pressed. Christina's hands twisted in her lap. "I wasn't completely sure about the timing," she said, which was clearly a prepared answer that avoided admitting she'd known all along. Patricia pulled out screenshots of Christina's Instagram messages with Aaron from April, showing dates that aligned perfectly with conception timing, and asked if she'd been intimate with him during that period. "I want to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights," Christina started, but her lawyer touched her arm and whispered something that made her reconsider. "Yes, I was with Aaron in April before the Vegas trip," she finally admitted. "Multiple times?" "Yes." "So when you claimed Mark was the father, you knew there was a possibility, perhaps even a strong probability, that Aaron was actually the biological parent?" Silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Christina answered, her voice barely audible. "I wasn't sure who the father was, but I hoped it was Mark because he would have been the best father, the most stable option for raising a child." Patricia let that statement hang in the air, its implications devastating. Christina had deliberately tried to trap me with another man's baby because she'd calculated I'd be the better provider, treating pregnancy as a strategic move rather than a sacred responsibility. The deposition continued for another hour, extracting admissions about the affair with her firm's client 18 months ago, about planning the Vegas encounters deliberately, about lying to mutual friends regarding why I'd canceled the wedding. By the end, Christina was crying, her makeup ruined and her lawyer looking like he regretted taking her case, while I sat there feeling vindicated but hollow. The fallout came quickly and comprehensively, like dominoes falling in accelerating sequence. Aaron, the Vegas man Christina had been publicly dating, broke up with her within days of the deposition when he learned about the pregnancy and realized he was almost certainly the father. Elaine sent me screenshots of their text exchange where Aaron told Christina he wanted no involvement or financial responsibility and accused her of trying to baby trap him the same way she'd attempted with me. Christina's professional reputation crumbled when the affair with her firm's client resurfaced through office gossip, someone having leaked details about the deposition testimony, and she submitted a voluntary resignation that everyone understood was essentially a firing to avoid the scandal of termination. Her social circle imploded as former friends distanced themselves from the chaos, several of them privately apologizing to me for believing her initial story about abandonment and cold feet, while others simply disappeared from her life entirely. Even her parents, who'd been vocally supportive throughout the wedding cancellation, pulled back after learning the full truth about Vegas, the fake paternity claim, and the deliberate deception she'd orchestrated. Her mother called me once to apologize, her voice tight with shame, saying she'd raised Christina better than this and couldn't understand what had gone wrong. The legal resolution came in October, 5 months after the canceled wedding, when Christina's attorney agreed to a settlement rather than risk going to trial with such damaging evidence. Patricia had demanded $35,000 but settled for $28,000, which Christina would pay in installments from whatever income she could scrape together, plus a formal written apology acknowledging she'd made false claims about paternity with knowledge that I might not be the father. That apology arrived via email, 3 paragraphs of carefully lawyered language that took responsibility without quite admitting intentional fraud, and I read it once before filing it away with all the other documentation of this nightmare. Christina faced single motherhood alone, Aaron having completely ghosted her after their breakup, and according to mutual acquaintances she'd moved back in with her parents in their small suburban house, working retail jobs that barely covered expenses. Her Instagram went private, the public performance of her life no longer sustainable, and the few glimpses I caught through friends showed someone who looked exhausted and defeated, the confident woman I'd known replaced by someone ground down by consequences she'd engineered herself. I felt no satisfaction watching her struggle, no vindictive pleasure in her obvious suffering, just a distant sadness that someone could destroy so much through selfish choices and calculated deception. Derek told me I was too forgiving, that Christina deserved every bit of hardship she was experiencing, but I couldn't sustain that level of anger indefinitely. It was exhausting hating someone who'd already removed themselves from my life so completely. I rebuilt my life with deliberate intention, treating recovery like a project that required systematic attention rather than waiting passively for time to heal wounds that needed active care. The first step was joining a men's support group for betrayal survivors that met Thursday evenings in a church basement, 8 guys ranging from early 20s to late 50s who'd all experienced some version of infidelity or abandonment. Listening to their stories helped normalize my own experience, made me realize that what I'd endured wasn't uniquely devastating but rather depressingly common, and the group leader taught practical strategies for processing trauma without letting it define my future relationships. I started exercising seriously for the first time since college, joining a gym where I could channel anger into something productive, and the physical exhaustion helped with the insomnia that had plagued me for months. My therapist suggested I needed a clean break from familiar surroundings, so in November I booked a 2-week solo trip to Iceland, spending my days exploring volcanic landscapes and my nights in small ghost houses where nobody knew my story or expected me to be anything other than a quiet American tourist processing something heavy. The isolation was therapeutic in ways I hadn't anticipated, the stark beauty of that country matching my internal landscape, and I returned home feeling lighter than I had since receiving that anonymous email. Work became my anchor during this period, the one area of life where I still felt competent and valued, and when my boss offered me a promotion to senior systems analyst requiring relocation to our Denver office, I accepted immediately despite having lived in the same city my entire adult life. The move represented a fresh start geographically and professionally, a chance to exist somewhere nobody knew about canceled weddings or paternity disputes, and I threw myself into the transition with energy I'd forgotten I possessed. I met Audrey 6 months after the canceled wedding at a professional conference in Phoenix where we were both attending sessions on database security, and our first conversation happened organically in a hotel bar after a particularly dry presentation about encryption protocols. She was funny and sharp, a senior developer at a healthcare company, and when I mentioned I'd recently relocated to Denver she said she lived there too and we should grab coffee sometime. Our first date was remarkably normal. Coffee that turned into dinner, conversation that flowed easily, no awkward silences or forced chemistry, and when she asked about my relationship history I gave her the abbreviated version about a broken engagement without going into traumatic details. "I appreciate your honesty," she said simply. "My last relationship ended badly too, so I understand needing time to trust again." We took things slowly, both of us cautious about commitment after being burned, and I appreciated that she never pushed for more than I could offer. Audrey understood when I needed space, never made demands I couldn't meet, And gradually I found myself opening up about Christina, about Vegas, about the entire nightmare in conversations that happened naturally rather than feeling forced. She really tried to trap you with someone else's baby? Audrey asked one evening, her expression somewhere between shocked and impressed. That takes a special kind of desperation. What I loved most about Audrey was her complete lack of drama. She paid her own bills, maintained her own friendships, had her own career ambitions, and never once suggested I should be anything other than exactly who I was. After a year of dating, I proposed during a quiet weekend at a cabin in the mountains, nothing elaborate or Instagram-worthy, just the two of us and a simple question about building a future together. She said yes without hesitation, and we planned a modest wedding for the following spring with 40 guests and zero stress. 14 months after my canceled wedding to Christina, I returned to my hometown for my grandmother's birthday party and made the mistake of stopping at a grocery store near my old apartment, the one Christina and I had shopped at weekly for 3 years. I was comparing prices on coffee brands when I heard a baby crying nearby and looked up to see Christina standing 20 feet away, her infant in a carrier strapped to her chest, looking exhausted in ways that went beyond normal new mother tiredness. She'd cut her hair short, wore no makeup, and her clothes looked like they'd been slept in, the polished woman I'd known replaced by someone just barely holding things together. Our eyes met across the produce section and I watched her face cycle through recognition, panic, and something that looked like shame before she gathered her courage and walked toward me pushing a cart with one hand, her other arm supporting the baby. "Mark," she said quietly, her voice lacking any of its former confidence. "Hi, Christina," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Can we talk for a minute? I know I have no right to ask, but please." I glanced at my watch more out of habit than actual time constraints and nodded, following her to a quieter area near the bakery section where the baby's crying wouldn't disturb other shoppers. Up close, she looked even worse, dark circles under her eyes, chapped lips, hair that needed washing, the kind of worn-down appearance that comes from months of stress and insufficient support. "I wanted to apologize," she started, words tumbling out like she'd been rehearsing this speech. "Not the lawyer-approved version I sent you, but a real apology for everything I did to you, Vegas, the pregnancy lie, the way I treated our relationship like it didn't matter." She shifted the baby to her other arm, bouncing slightly to soothe his crying. I was selfish and terrified of commitment and I sabotaged the best thing I had because I couldn't appreciate stability until I lost it. I listened without interrupting, watching her struggle through an apology that sounded genuine in ways her previous explanations never had. "I know Aaron's the father now. We did a test after he ghosted me and yeah, it's his," she continued. "I tried to trap you with another man's baby because I knew you'd be a good father and I was panicking about being alone, which is probably the most horrible thing I've ever admitted out loud." The baby's crying intensified and she rocked him more vigorously, her exhaustion visible in every movement. "My parents help when they can, but it's mostly just me, and I'm barely keeping my head above water working 2 part-time jobs, and I know this is exactly what I deserve but it's so much harder than I ever imagined." She finally met my eyes fully. "I heard you got engaged, and I'm genuinely happy for you because you deserve someone who actually appreciates what you offer instead of taking it for granted like I did." I stood there processing this version of Christina, humbled, honest, stripped of the entitled confidence that had defined her, and felt something shift in my chest that might have been the final release of anger I'd been carrying. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "It takes courage to admit you were wrong, especially this thoroughly." "Are you happy now?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "With your fiancé, with your life? Did you actually move on, or do I still haunt you?" I thought about Audrey waiting at my parents' house, about our upcoming wedding that would be everything my canceled one wasn't, honest, simple, built on mutual respect rather than performance. I thought about my promotion, my new city, the therapy that had helped me process trauma without letting it define me, and realized the anonymous video hadn't been my destruction but rather my liberation from a relationship built entirely on lies and calculation. "Yes," I told Christina honestly, watching relief and pain cross her face simultaneously. "I genuinely am happy now." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and thanked me for talking to her before turning away with her crying baby and half-empty cart, disappearing into the store's fluorescent-lit aisles. I stood there for another moment watching her go, feeling the final weight of our shared past lift from my shoulders like something physical finally releasing, and then I bought my coffee and drove back to my parents' house where Audrey was waiting, ready to move forward into a future that was finally, completely mine to build.